All right, come from the doorway too, hanging out with Eddie. We are going to go into a storied past, your current stuff you're going on, and everything in between. Even a little bit about your acting career that you and I have slightly talked about in a few chats that we had. But Eddie, why don't you introduce yourself and kind of go from there?
Okay, my name is Edward Giles Southgate. People know me as Eddie. Back in the day, they used to call me EJ. Those are my initials, and I've been doing this for a little while.
Cool. That's awesome, man. So why don't we kind of start back in the beginning, because a lot of my folks probably don't know too much about you, being that we've both been doing this for, I don't know, 4 decades now. Why don't you talk about the early days when you were starting to love industrial music, noise, things like that, and started getting some projects together? Start from the beginning, my friend.
Okay, well, I was born in a log cabin in Astoria, Queens. No, the thing is that, yeah, I'm from Queens, New York, okay? And I was born into a very Italian Catholic family. And my grandfather worked for the Bridge and Tunnel Authority for New York
Nice.
City. And he got tired of freezing in the winter and dying in the heat in the summer. He was the guy who took the tolls at the toll when you go on the Triborough Bridge. Okay, so that's what he did. And back in those days, in the 60s, you could switch over. So if you worked in the city and you wanted to get a job in another department, even if you wanted to go sanitation or fire department, you had to take a test, wait a little while, and then you can go in. Now everything is separate. But back then, so he went from working the bridge and tunnels to housing authority. Okay, so he was there taking tolls, Triborough Bridge, and then they said, I don't want to do this anymore. So he had lots of skills. He was a handyman. He knew about electronics. He knew about mechanical machinery and everything. So he said, I'm wasting my time here. So he went over to the housing authority. So they placed him in the projects. They called them projects. There were housing projects in New York, all over the city. Okay, that's the term for them. It's not a derogatory. Okay, so just to make that clear. And the thing is, so he's there, and it's like, I guess it's 67, 68, maybe 70. So anyway, he would go there, and he would come home sometimes with a lot of appliances that were broken. People, they would take their, whatever it is, toaster ovens or whatever it is, radios, TVs. And if a knob snapped off, sometimes it would just wound up in the dumpster, and he would take it home and he would fix it. So he had a workshop, nothing big, but just a little workshop with some machinery types and everything. And I was a little tyke, maybe 4 or 5 years old. And I would sit with him and he would show me how to solder something. And I backed up into a soldering gun once, and he was like, "Oh my God," because I was like just a little kid, and I moved over and I burned my elbow, and he's like, "Oh," he got a little panicky. Loving man. And the reason why I'm talking about all of this is because in the workshop, the machinery sounds, the things that were going on, and the love that I have for my grandfather was there. My grandmother, she worked at A&P supermarkets. Okay, before she retired. I don't know if you remember A&P supermarkets. It's a East Coast thing, and she worked in the butcher shop. So like some of my days were just spending time with them. Now this is the time when people were very nice. You can take your kid to work a little bit, show them what's going on. Sometimes my mom would drop me off a little bit, and my grandmother would take big pieces of meat and put them in a meat grinder and then push them down with something that looked like a bowling pin. And at the other end would come out chopped meat, and then they would wrap it and then sell it. That's what she did. So she worked in the meat department as a meat butcher, and my grandfather worked in housing. Okay. Now, between these two things, okay, this set off, where my imagination was going, because when I didn't have that, I had TV. So I'm watching like Huckleberry Hound or something, right? Or the Groovy Ghoulies or something that's on TV, right? I'm watching TV. I'm living with my mom. I'm living, with my grandparents. And that was the base of my imagination. You have to understand too, like, oh, so the Catholicism thing is that, I go to church. I think it's something like going to church was like going to like, a play. Oh, it's more theater. So that's theater to me. Okay. I weaned off toys, little toys, figures, whatever, when I was a very young guy. I just didn't have any interest in like playing with things. So I would just like hang around with my grandfather, my grandmother. My grandfather would take me fishing out in Sheepshead Bay, Far Rockaway. They had a charter boat. You give them $20. You go out for the whole day. It was just an excuse sometimes to drink beer with him. He drank beer, whatever, but he would catch fish and everything. And that was my life as a tot. Okay. So let's fast forward. My mom moved out of the house in Astoria to Long Island City, which is just south of Astoria in Queens, New York. Okay. Now, Long Island City is a neighborhood that is basically, it's strictly working class. Okay. And in that neighborhood were a lot of factories and a lot of warehouses. Okay. And there was a park right up the street from where I live. Now I'm going to wrap this into the first experience I had as a little guy. I wasn't that little, but like, okay. So do you remember the original movie, The Warriors?
Of course.
Okay. Do you remember when the Warriors were on the train and there was a fire at the train?
Yep.
You get off the train and they're talking to a gang called the Orphans.
Yep.
Okay. Now there's the Orphans. Okay. That whole scene was on 45th Road in Long Island City on my block, block, the block that I lived in. Okay. With my family. Okay. And that train was right up the street, the 7 train. It'll take you right into Midtown Manhattan. Okay. That's my life at like 9 or 10. Okay. Now, I hung out with a bunch of maniac kids that were into, climbing roofs and going, and we played baseball and fighting and killed a man with the ball. It's just simple. You grab the ball, you run, and they beat the shit out of you until you let go of the ball, and then someone else says, and we do it to him. Yep. That's our games. Throwing rocks at each other. Fun times, right? So, right. So we want to talk about the first thing that happened in this. So we were making so much noise in the neighborhood. We were so excited that they were filming something, and something like the Warriors were like gangs and stuff. Okay. Yeah. Us as kids, we were screaming all the time. We were always, and they were like, okay, cut. And they had to like tell us to be quiet. And we wouldn't. Like, we really wanted to be extras in this movie. We really wanted to be in the movie itself because we really felt that we were sort of like the kids. We were like the Orphans, really. We were just these ragtag kids, okay? So I don't know who came up with this idea, but they took a few cameras and a few lights, and they said, okay, kids, you know what? We're going to go down the street. We're going to put up some camera. We're going to put you in the movie. We're like, really? Like, yeah. Like, yeah, we're going to put you in the movie. I'm like, oh, great. So they took us all the way down the street. And they say, okay, this is a scene where you have to be really quiet because you're sneaking around, right? You're a gang. You're trying to like get your position. I'm like, okay. So the whole gang of us, I know I'm going on for a while. The whole gang of us are down there, and we're trying to like pretend that we're sneaking around and everything. They had the lights on, and they had the camera there, and everyone's going, great. That's a wrap. You guys are great. Well, the cameras weren't on. We didn't know anything. So the camera wasn't on. So it was like, they just got us out of the way so that they can shoot their movie, and then they shot it. And then we said, when we went to go to the theater, it was like, where's our scene? It was like, it was never there. It was just like the funniest thing. It was just like, they kind of fooled us. It was hysterical that they did that. Someone there was clever enough to say, okay, we got to get these kids out of here. And they did that. So they set up the cameras and the lights, and they said, okay, yeah, you guys are, and like, so we never got in the movie.
Gotcha.
That was really funny. So every time I watch the Warriors, I watch this one scene. There's this one scene where one of the Warriors of the girlfriend is on the steps. If you look very carefully, you may want to watch it again. You'll see a shade, like the Venetian blinds move just a little bit in the back. And that was my mother looking out the window. Okay, just peeking out the window, and and like, of course, the scene is right there on the two carriages. But if you're looking back, you'll see like a Venetian blind move, and that was my mom like looking out the window, going, "Aren't they done yet?" So.
Well, we live very similar lives. I'm going to tell you right now. My dad was born in Brooklyn.
Ah,
He became a New Jersey State Trooper. I lived in Jersey. I lived in New York for a long time. I played CBGBs. I played Continental. I played all
yeah.
those places growing up too. So like we did live. My grandfather worked for a textile factory, so I understand the machines very very much on like what you're talking about. So
Yes,
anyway,
yeah.
cool, man. Cool.
Yeah, and that was like the start of it. Now the whole ball of wax started. My mom used to take, once again, I always go very back to my childhood. My mom would take me to cultural things. So she took me to a lot of museums, and she took me to the zoo, and the zoo would depress me because I look at the animals and it was sad, and I don't want to go to the so she'd take me to museums. On Saturdays at Carnegie Hall, they would have matinees. And that means it was like $2 or $3 because they just wanted to, that was just like education and culture for the people. It wasn't suit and ties and tuxedos. It was just, they would show up and they would play like, Fantasia or, the theme from, the Long Ranger, what is it? I forget, William Tell Overture. My mom would wanted to culture me because in New York City, as you know, the culture's everywhere. You just walk outside your house and there's a lot of culture. Now, in my neighborhood, there wasn't very much culture. There was a lot of kids that didn't have much to do except drive their bikes around, fight with each other. There was a weird sort of like code. It's like I had a bike, and then I don't want to say his name. Like there was these brothers, and they would take my bike, and they would borrow it for about a week, and then they would eventually, after me saying I got to get my bike back, they would give it back to me. So they would borrow things. So they borrowed my football, they borrowed my basketball. Sooner or later, these things just disappeared, and you're like, where? And that's it. So I got tired of this. I got really tired of this, and this is like I'm like 10 years old. So 4th of July, 1976. It's the 4th of July. So in Queens, New York, people are blowing off massive fireworks. I mean, they're throwing blockbusters off the roofs, and like the cats are going crazy, the dogs are going crazy. I'm just fearing for my life. Kids that don't have any fireworks, they're just setting fire to garbage cans. That's fire, hey, hooray, right? 4th of July. There is a building in my neighborhood, right around the corner from where I lived. Okay, it was an old schoolhouse. And we used to play stickball and football in the parking lot area. It's all built up now, but that was PS1. Now, PS1 was the first public school in Queens, and it was abandoned in, I think, 68, 69. And a woman named Alana Heiss went in there and worked with the city. She worked with the city to revitalize that building and turn it into an art space. So here I am, 10 years old. I want to get away from the neighborhood. I tried the front door of PS1, and it's open. So I go in there, and I'm looking around, and it's quiet. And it's not like a gallery that you would see with pristine white walls. It's raw space. It's a school building, basically. So there's lockers, and there's peeling paint, and there's a gymnasium. And I go in there, and I'm looking at art. And the art I'm looking at is highly conceptual. In fact, some of it looked demolished. Some of it was just broken wood and glass, twisted metal, photographs that were thumbtacked on walls. They wasn't even framed, just thumbtacked on walls. And that's what they showed. And I'm like, this is making sense to me. This is like a whole different dimension. It's almost like a private universe. And I'm like, I like this. It makes sense to me. It takes me back to my grandfather's workshop. And I'm like, there's something machine-like about that. There's something raw about it. The art that I was exposed to was in, the Metropolitan Museum of Art or the Guggenheim, where it's, you can't touch it, you can't approach it, it's there. There's guards there. There's nothing going on in PS1 except the art. And every now and then you'd see an artist walk by. And if you're brave enough, you can say, hi, how you doing? They're like, hello, and you can talk. And someone would, kind of standoffish. I'm a 10-year-old kid. But the one person that talked to me first was a conceptual artist, very famous guy named Vito Acconci. Vito Acconci, you can look him up, very famous. And he's from the Bronx. And he was like, it's almost like a Hollywood moment. He's like, hi, how you doing? He's like, hey, how you doing? He had this rough voice. He's like, hello, how are you? I was like, all right. He goes, what are you doing? He goes, well, I'll show you. And he showed me. He's like, I'm trying to make some sort of ramp that goes out a giant window on the 3rd floor. And he's trying to build these ramps and stuff because so he's doing this wild conceptual art, and he's actually showing me what he's doing. he probably won't remember any of this, but for me as a kid, he gave me his attention, and it was fascinating that he's building these ramps that are going to go out into the courtyard. So like some weeks go by, and I invite my mom to come see PS1 because there's going to be an opening, right? So I figure out there's an opening. I take my mother with me, and there's all sorts of art and performance art going on, and you know, a DJ, and people are drinking champagne or something. And then like we go all around the building, and in the sub basement of this building, okay, there was a performance. It said performance. You go down the stairs, and in the boiler room, there was a giant old furnace, and Vito Acanzi, as a performance, was shoveling old coal into a burning furnace, and that was the performance.
Oh, wow.
And I was just absolutely stunned that somehow I would think, okay, maybe my grandfather is a performance artist. Maybe I'm a performance artist. Maybe you are a performance artist. Because if someone like Vito Acanzi is shoveling coal into a furnace, and we're looking at this, then that means it's life as performative art. And that got me started to go a different direction than what was going on in the neighborhood. Now, I had a friend in the neighborhood. His name is Harv. I bring him up. I brought him up in an interview I did with White Center Beat Noise. Now, Harv was 3 or 4 years older than me. So I was like 12, and he was already 16, 17, something like that. So he was a little bit older, but he had something that the other kids had. He had a brain, okay? And he also knew that the neighborhood itself was a bad place. It was a bad environment. Nothing good was going to come here. You're either going to wind up in jail, on drugs, or in a shitty job somewhere that you're not going to like, or you're going to knock up your girlfriend and start a family without any provisions, okay? And that was going on in the neighborhood. He said, I don't hang out in the neighborhood anymore. We used to all hang out in the park on the monkey bars. But then he said, I don't do this anymore. He had another friend in the neighborhood that had an 8mm camera. So he was making like Star Trek. You know, he was like, you know, really cheap films with Star Trek figures and everything. And it was an alternative to what was going on outside. So we would hang out with Eduardo, and then there's Harv. And then Harv said, you know, I go to the city a lot. I go, really? So I'm 12 years old. I'm not really allowed to go out into the city. So he goes to the city. He comes back with all these art books, and he comes back with records like, so his brother listens to Rush and Aerosmith and Styx.
Yep.
Harv comes back with Joy Division, Faust, Birthday Party, Throbbing Gristle, Cabaret Voltaire. So we're listening to this music, and we're taking place. So we're listening to The Doors, and we're listening to Throbbing Gristle. We're listening to you know, some other records, Aerosmith, and then we'll listen to Joy Division. And we're sitting there, and in the Joy Division stuff, it just had more directness to me. It was just like, okay, this is because before that, music just came out of the radio. That's where the music was. Where's the music? It's in the radio. So I mean, like, you know, my very first show on my own, I went to Max's Kansas City. It was a school night, and I went to Max's Kansas City, and I wound up seeing Suicide. Okay.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't expect to see Suicide. I was like, I just want to see live music. I'll say any band that is out there. I don't care. So I followed these people over to Max's Kansas City. I didn't even really know what it was. I got in Max's Kansas City. I'm looking at Suicide, and I'm like, okay, where's the band? Because I'm expecting a band like guitar, bass, drums, you know, quartet, singer, you know, maybe like the Heartbreakers or the Dolls or Ramones. Because that's what I was listening to at that moment. And then I see this, and I see Alan Vega, I see Martin Rev, and there's no, you know, orthodox band going on. It's them. And Alan Vega he's spectacular. He's got this charisma. He's like a Elvis Presley, futuristic Elvis Presley. The music is minimal and it's repetitive. And like that did it for me. I said, I don't want to know anymore. This is what I need to do. Because honestly, I was trying to put together a band as early as 13, 14 with kids in the neighborhood. It wasn't working. I didn't know how to tune a bass. No one had drums. And then I started to look at the logistics of the whole thing. The whole logistics of the whole thing is that a band costs money. And I don't have money for a lockout space. I have no money. I have a cheap little amp, a bass that can't stay in tune, and a cheap little Casio keyboard. So I mean, it's like really just like, and so like, and my mom said, you know, it's nice to do as a hobby, but don't expect anything great to come from this. And I already had stars in my eyes. I'm thinking, okay, I just saw Alan Vega and Martin Rare suicide. Anything could happen. So I still, and the New York City was so energetic. It was this place where there was just like so much kinetic energy. There were kids breakdancing on street corners. There was people playing guitars. There's busking. There's all sorts of things. And this giant culture, whirlwind of culture. And I said, I got a chance here. I'm going to try to do something. So I tried to get in a few bands. It wasn't working out. I figure I'll be a singer, because the singer, what's a singer do? The singer doesn't have any, he's a microphone, right? He's got bass guitar, bass amps, drums, got to drag them upstairs, drag them in and out of cars. And I started way back with my grandfather. He gave me tape recorders. So I would just record stuff in the street, stuff off the radio. I would just record these tapes. And I didn't realize that this little library of sounds that I was creating was basically going to be the start of how I got into all of this music and noise. Yeah. Right. That's how I did it. So I'd listen to these tapes. And then a little while later, like 14, 15, 16, I started to get, now back in the day, you have to understand that it was mail only. There was no computers. There was www.nothing. So you had to write letters to people. Hi, I like your catalog. You'd get these catalogs. Fanzines were a great place. You'd see a little ad. So I got in touch with people like Hal McGee from Cause and Effect, and Al Margolis, who had Sound of Pig Music, and Chris, who, rest in peace, had Harsh Reality. Yep. And Audiophile and all the Carl Howard and all these. So that was my starting point. They had tapes. This is the 80s, early mid 80s, 84, 85. And I was learning more and more about how these were home tapers. You can have a studio in your own home. And I said, wow, I thought you had to go into a studio and spend lots of money to make, fuzzy sounds. And I'm like, no, you can do it at home. I'm like, okay, great. So that was it. That was my thing. So I get these tapes and I listen to these tapes, and I was listening to my own tapes, and I'm like saying, nah, they're not really good. I mean, they're just like, it was just like the editing process. And I just didn't have the wherewithal. I didn't have a 4-track machine. I didn't know where to buy them. I didn't know how much they cost. I didn't know anything. So I was just basically taping with a tape recorder, like a handheld tape recorder.
Sure.
That was my beginning. So then I tried to work with other bands using tapes and this little cheap keyboard with some effect pedals or whatever. And, so I was working with these other bands. I wound up with a band from New Jersey, from Garfield, New Jersey. I wound up there and I was traveling. Now I had a car and I'm driving to Garfield, New Jersey. And I was playing with a band called Trigger Vision, and Brian in the band, and Chrissy in the band, and Dan, and then, what's his name? Bash was on the drums. Okay. And me playing synth and everything. And I would borrow a lot of, I got really close to Brian. Brian would lend me his gear. I would lend him my gear. I left my gear.
Oh, nice.
It was a very trustworthy thing. They had a basement space that they can practice in. And we got a few shows. We played the tri-state area, and we did do a few shows. And, but I will tell you, not to, Brian and Chrissy were constantly bickering about one thing or another, either domestic situations or whatever. And so me and Dan were looking at each other saying, man, this isn't really working. We're doing good. And now, we're just constantly fighting. Now, Brian had his own thing on the side called Temple of Set, which was all tape sounds. And he was already out there doing the tape thing.
Okay.
Well, I was looking at my collection of tapes and I'm saying, wow, first of all, I said, I think I'm going to back away from this for a little while, because it really wasn't working as a band. We would get shows, and then there was just like a lot of dead space, and I was wanting to keep the ball rolling. Dan had ideas because he was into motorcycles at that point, and he had the van. And I explained this in another interview that, the van was the most important piece of gear in the whole band. No van, no band. You can't get to the gig with half a ton of gear. Right. There's no way of doing it. So when he took a powder, he left New Jersey. I think he was living in Patterson or Fairfield. Anyway, he got out. He went to Philadelphia because he said Philadelphia had a real scene. There's something really going on in Philadelphia. And we had made friends with this other band called Sink Manhattan. And they were around in the 80s. Now, that's when I shifted, and I spent a very short period of time in another band called Missing Foundation that were very notorious.
Oh yeah, I
And
know exactly. I actually saw them live, so maybe I saw you and don't even realize it. I saw them in
maybe,
Tompkins Square. I saw them in Tompkins Square Park.
oh wow, I
Okay.
might have, yeah, I was either at that show or in the band at that point, but my interactions with them were very slight. I wanted to be in them. They already had a full piece, and the person I dealt with mostly was Mark
Mhm.
or Peter Missing. Okay. Now, Peter Missing, I knew from another band called Drunk Driving, which was a
Mhm.
few years before, and he still used the inverted cocktail glass. That came from Drunk Driving. If anyone wants to know New York City law. Okay. So they were kind of noise rock. They had metal, they had two percussionists. You have Peter on a, one of those loud, what do you call this?
Megaphones or whatever. Yeah.
Megaphones, right? The
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
megaphone. So they had that sound I was looking for. I gave them some of my tapes that I was making. Mark really liked them. Peter was kind of sketchy. I don't want to go into it, but I what happened was they were recording their second record, 1933. Okay,
Yep.
and you know I get to the studio. I remember it was on like Avenue A, I believe, or was it First Avenue? Anyway, I get to the studio, and Peter's outside, and the transaction was I gave him money for the recording. I go, I'm going to
Ah,
pitch in. Okay, he immediately took off and went around the corner, and I didn't see him. So I don't know what happened to him or the money, but it went that way. It didn't go into the studio. So I go into the studio. I got an aluminum bat and a 50-gallon drum and some chains, and I'm making noise too. And they're recording it. So
yep.
we do this for about 2 hours, and then I leave. And then pretty much that was my big stay in Missing Foundation. They started to do shows around the city, and they weren't inviting me to go play. I didn't know. No one called me up. I would constantly have to chase one of them around and say, "Oh yeah, we're playing Tompkins Square, or down here or over here."
Yeah. Yeah.
They
Yeah.
Yeah, and they used to play a lot in the street. They used to play down on the Lower East Side in these vacant lots and just have
Yep.
these sort of like acoustic, maybe bring the megaphone or some rig where there's a bass and everything. So after a while, I just really, there was a lot of chaos. The band caused a lot of vandalism throughout the city. And then, the big blowout was there was a big riot at Tompkins Square Park. Okay.
Yep.
And they kind of were, instigators in this. Okay.
Yep.
Because you had on one side, you had kind of like the leftist movement from like even the 60s, okay,
Yep.
that were a foundation down the Lower East Side. So you had like people like, so a lot of this had to do with gentrification, and it had to do with basically they wanted to put a curfew on Tompkins Square Park because a lot of
Correct.
people was hanging out there. And they said, the punks were a nuisance, and there were a lot of kind of homeless and drifters in there. Drugs were there. Okay, so they wanted to clean up the park, put a curfew on it, and it just came to a head. And it was around that time I just said I got to back away from this too. This is just I don't want to do with
Makes
this.
sense.
So I used to go to another place called Generator Gallery. Okay, and Generator Gallery was run by Ken Montgomery, who was a really nice guy. And it was there I found a whole new group of people, which were kind of like back to the tapers, Al Margolis and Al McGee and all these people. So this was a small storefront gallery performance space that had tapes and records, very avant-garde, some industrial, some post-industrial, noise, tape cut up loops, everything. So he was a very nice and generous person, and he allowed me to go in there and perform a few times. So all of this culminated into the project that became my solo project, away from Trigger Vision, away from Missing Foundation, and it became Helltown Incorporated. That was the name I chose for what I was doing. And it was basically, these are pretty much all the tapes that I did. And I would finally, my friend had a 4-track, so I would kind of layer them now. So instead of having like just one tape making a machine noise, I had the machine noise with a voice and now a rhythm pattern. So finally I got all the sounds together, and I recorded a lot of this at John Gill's house, John and Yana, who were in a band called Big Stick. They were great. They were totally original, just a 2-piece, and they had backing tapes, and they had these crazy outfits and everything, and big hats, and they were just a great bunch of people, and they lived in Astoria, and they were able to help me get most of this together. So this version is put out by Tribe Tapes, and I really thank Max Eastman for putting this out for me. Okay, so he got this tape. He got the original master tape from Al Margolis. He saw a lot of potential in it, and he was able to reissue it with a package, and there's photos in it. It's a nice package. So this is cool. I'm very, very grateful for Max Eastman and Tribe Tapes for putting this out. Okay, and to talk about that a little bit further, the original tapes. Sorry, let me just reach.
Oh yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Okay. So talking about Max Eastman, okay, great label, Tribe Tapes. He has a sub-series of generator recordings. These are from Ken John Montgomery, his archives, and this is one of the things I did. This is Helltown Incorporated. I was starting to use the name EJ Vodka about the time, right? So I still had this idea. So this is all pre-Final Solution. So I was playing Generator Gallery. I had Helltown Incorporated going on. I had all this stuff going on. This era was between, I would say, 85 to about 88. Okay. This was the time I was involved with that. Okay. And I had been doing my tape sounds since the early 80s when I was still going to punk shows at A7 and CBGB's. And I could never figure out how to connect punk to the avant-garde. It just seemed that there were just two different streams going on here. So I started to get very annoyed, I'd have to say, once again. I got annoyed that, I'll just say it there's a cadre of people in New York City, and they've worked very, very hard to make themselves known as musicians and artists and performers, okay? Right. But it's a very small, tightly knit group of people that operate in their own little world. And if you're an outsider trying to get in, it's almost like a sperm cell trying to, get into that ovary, that egg, right? And it's not going to happen. They won't let you out. So millions die and one gets in, and there you go, birth. Okay. So the thing is I could not try. I was getting extremely frustrated with venues. I was getting extremely frustrated with, so-called artists, whatever. So I was getting really annoyed because I figure, hey, I'm just doing things too. Why can't I play the Knitting Factory? How come I can't play Tonic? How come so I got a little piffed, So I used to see a guy in New York City walking around. He used to go to bookstores and record stores, and he had this cool vest, and it had Motorhead patch and Throbbing Gristle patch. So long story short, I didn't know him. I would see him around, but when you see something like that, like Throbbing Gristle and Motorhead, and I'm like, okay, yeah. Right. So we ran into each other at CBGB's at a Rape Man show. That was Steve Albini's band, Big Black. And I had a few beers. I'm drinking a 40 outside. They want $15 at the door, unheard of at CBGB's. This is 89, 88. No, it's 88. They want $15. I said, nah. I said, I saw Big Black 4 times, and I saw them, and I said, man, they blow out. I go, I don't want to go see Rape Man. It's not the same. It's not Big Black. Different sound, right? No drum machine. That sound is gone. It's just more like indie rock.
Yeah, it's an indie rock thing for sure.
So then Greg overhears this and comes into my little circle, and he says, yeah, me too. I don't like, I like Big Black a lot better. And I said, I've seen you around. I've seen you at St. Mark's Sounds. I saw you at See Here bookstore, fanzine shop. And we start talking and we exchanged numbers. And then time went on. And then somebody called somebody, and I said, hey, we should get together and talk about music because I think we have a lot in common. And he's like, sure, okay, but I want you to know I'm already taken. I'm in a band called Beg for Eden. And I said, cool, when are you playing? He goes, well, I'm playing here. So he played the Pyramid Club. And we went there, and I saw him. I saw him play with his other band. And I noticed he had a synthesizer. And so my idea was to do something that was much more aggressive and much more fierce, because although I like Generator, and doing avant-garde tapes, you know, I really thought that I really wanted to make more of a standout, you know, point of view. I really wanted to make a message out there of some sort. This is fine, but I don't really know. The message was being sort of buried within the music. It was just like music, people see it, then they leave. This tape actually, this is a lecture, if you want to call it a lecture. I'm basically talking about like doing street art and agitprop and you know, culture jamming, a lot of that in here. And I'm skipping records and I'm showing art. I would take in the subways, they would have like, you know, billboards and stuff, and you can deface them and stuff. There's like really cool things that you can do with in the public with art and advertising and billboards. I really, you know, so that's where I was going with this. So why did I start Final Solution? Why did I pick a name like Final Solution? Why did I want to do something like that? It doesn't make any real sense. I mean, you're really going to get a lot of people annoyed, right? But that was the point. I really wanted to think that, okay, and I know this is not very high art here, okay, but basically when I was young, I used to watch wrestlers, pro wrestling, and my little brother loved pro wrestling. And everyone knows that the heel, the villain, is way more interesting than the hero, right?
Absolutely.
The Executioners, Ox Baker. I don't know how old you are, but I used to love Ox Baker and the Sheik with the pencil.
Oh, Iron Sheik,
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to wrap that into a sort of quote unquote postmodern semiotic expression of my frustration with the world as is. So I said the only way you're going to get people attracted to see what you're doing is to go extreme. Now, we didn't need this because we already had someone called G.G. Allen. Okay.
Yep.
And the reason why I bring up G.G. Allen is because whatever you think of him, he was quite a force. Okay.
Right.
He went out there, balls out. The first time I saw G.G. Allen, he played A7, which is primarily a punk and hardcore club.
Yep.
And he was absolutely fearless. He went in there, he wrecked the place. And I remember one thing he did. He got down on his hands and knees. And this is like the winter. He got down on his hands and knees and he licked the floor.
Yep.
A muddy, shitty floor with beer and mud and whatever else is on the floor. And he licked it from one end to the other. I couldn't believe he did that. He licked the floor. And I'm like, oh my God, who would ever do that? So I'd seen G.G. Allen a few times, but I said to myself, you would have G.G. Allen syndrome. The G.G. Allen syndrome is very simple. If that's your thing, if that's your gimmick or your shtick or your aesthetic, if you're out there and you're tearing yourself apart, you're slashing yourself, and then the next show you're breaking bottles over your head, or you're fighting with 5 people, okay? The thing is that if you keep working that, you're going to have to keep doing that, because the moment you stop doing that, people are going to get bored and move on to something else. That's what it seemed like. It's like he was almost on a sort of dead-end path. He would have to get more and more extreme all the time. So I saw this and I said, you know, I'm not going to do that or outdo it or overdo it, because that's really not what I'm trying to do. What I was really trying to do was subvert the idea that certain people have a certain amount of power in a scene or a culture, but they don't allow other people to do something too, because somehow it's disagreeable. And that disagreement has no negotiation power to it. I'm disagreeing with you. We can't negotiate this. Therefore, I'm out. I become the out group. I'm the outlier. And I said, that's fine. And so before that, when I got together with Greg would basically, we got all the gear together. We would play in these practice, lockout studios. And like I said, we would play this music that was kind of like industrial, dark, death industrial, post, whatever you want to call it. It sounded very much like early TG, maybe, Control Bleeding a little bit. It was like dark ambient, and it sounded like Brighter Death Now a little bit, okay, or like early Rama or something. But it was good, but I felt it was directionless. I mean, like, we just making these long pieces of music. We would play like 2 or 3 sets in a 2-hour period. And we would play these very long sets, 20, 30 minutes. We'd just go on and on and on. And the whole idea was we were going to take the tapes, Greg would record these things, and then edit them down, so that we can make some sort of sense of them. But when we would listen back to the tapes, like, Greg liked what we were doing, But I said, honestly, I said it was kind of boring. I mean, it seemed a little boring. It seemed great when we were listening to it, but I said, I don't know. There's something about this that needs more. There's something that needs more. So I had a friend, Chris. Chris was from Connecticut. He was in the punk scene there. He was in a band called Thin White Line, and I think he was in another band up there, but he had moved from Connecticut. Okay, he was in Hartford. He moved down to Brooklyn. Okay, he lived right across the street from Pratt University. Okay, so he brought his motorcycles and his bass guitar and everything. And you know, I knew him through the scene. I knew him through another connector in Pittsburgh because Thin White Line would go out there and play. So it was like a network. So I asked Chris to join Final Solution. Now, at first he said, I didn't come to Brooklyn to join a band. I don't want to do that. I did that in Connecticut. I don't want to do that anymore. I go, okay. So how about you just come down and check us out? He goes, oh, I can do that. Excuse me. So I said, why don't you play this keyboard? He goes, I'm not a keyboard player. I go, what do you play? I go, I play bass. I go, well, play the low notes. You're a bass player.
Yeah.
So he was reluctant. He just wanted to drink and sit there in the lockout space, and he didn't want to get involved. I go, I tell you what, we're going to do a second set. Why don't you get behind the keyboard and just try? He goes, all right. So he's hitting a no. He hits another no. I'm out front now singing, and things are working up. And he said, yeah, that's not bad. And I go, you like? He goes, yeah. He goes, I tell you what, I don't want any responsibilities. I'm not booking shows. I'm not holding keyboards. You guys got to do everything. I'll just show up on my motorcycle and play. I go, it's a deal. So he joined. We picked a name. We started, and we got our first demo tape out in 1990. Okay. So I was working with Greg Scott from about the late 1988 when this tape came out. And at that point, I wanted to move on to something else. We had a no-name project until about 89. Chris Ustinich came on board. And by the end of 1989, we had the trio that would become Final Solution.
Okay.
So then we went out there and we just did what we did, which is basically we wrote very nasty songs about very nasty subjects. We tried to make the music as fierce as possible. Now, I'll tell you that, like, in hindsight, you know, a lot of the detractors of Final Solution compare us to White House, okay? And I want to dismiss this, okay? Because although I knew what White House was doing, okay, and I was familiar with them, they weren't my number one influence. In fact, they didn't really influence me at all. What influenced me the most was what was going on in New York City, just the energy there, because as you know, it's a city of culture, but it's also a city of crime and danger and violence. And, you know, if you're a punker and you're going on the subway and someone's looking at your leather jacket like they want to steal it from you. So there's this sort of you always got to be on guard. Okay. Because I would come home at 2, 3, 4 in the morning after going out, and there would be all this riffraff rolling around. So I wanted to capture that imagery, that element of New York City being a city of possibilities, but also a place of great concern and danger. Okay, there was danger. I wanted the music to be kind of dangerous. Generator, I love the place, but it's not a dangerous place. It's right. Very safe. It's a safe, sedate, people doing their stuff, and it's beautiful. I love it. But I'm going on the subway and I'm taking my life in my hands every time I go out there. And if you're with your girlfriend or whoever, your significant other, and now you have to be sort of because who knows what happens. The city was filled with drugs and crime and madness. Okay. So that's the influence, okay? And I said this in the other interview. I'm not trying to make a repeat of that, but
no problem.
I wanted to be the biggest band possible. So my model were not bands that were doing this already in basements or loft spaces. My influence was AC/DC. My influence was what I grew up with when I was with Harv and his brother Henry. So the Doors, AC/DC. So you have a front man that's very, very, he's very, very, profound. He's out there. He's got charisma. And I thought that possibly I can channel some of that macho energy and get out there and just do it like that. Henry Rollins, people like that just were out there just kicking ass on stage, Iggy Pop for certain, so all of this like frontman band, but I never thought of myself as them being my backing band. We were like Motorhead. We were just three dudes just smashed together. That's how I felt about it. So
well, to me, it always felt like it was like a Swans meets like Brighter Death Now kind of vibe when I listened to it. Like it had that Michael Gira kind of fucking front man. Like this is my band, but everybody is my band with me. Like we're all one band. So like early like Cop period, like Swans and stuff.
Yeah,
it gave me a lot of vibes of that. So
yeah, and I was buddies with a lot of these people. But the closest band I would say I was close to, only because I knew Nats, was Cop Shoe Cop. I really liked Cop Shoe Cop.
I love them. Yeah.
So I was really trying to negotiate with them how I can get gigs opening for Cop Shoe Cop. But Todd A was kind of the leader of the band, and I knew them all. They were all cool, Filer, Phil, and Nats, and I would hang out with them, and because they were in Brooklyn, but they didn't like the Final Solution vibe. They saw it as being, the name, the imagery, and that's not what they were going for. They were kind of into sort of socio-political consciousness a little bit, and talking about, slumlords and drug deal, all these weird things.
They were very much more a noise rock band. Like that's what they wanted to be. Yeah. Right. And you were going for that more power electronics kind of hateful, yelling at the world kind of vibe. No, I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what happened with Final Solution. And, Final Solution came to a crashing halt because both Chris and I developed very, very serious drug habits. That's the honesty of it. We were more interested in putting drugs in our bodies than actually working as a band. I cutted to see the frustration, and he was a dear friend of mine, Greg Scott. He was a dear friend of mine, and he was getting a little bit frustrated how, we were getting a lot less done. We got a lot done, but we could have gone so much further had we not wrapped our trip, Chris and I's trip, into just getting drugs and using drugs and I have to take a break, go to the bathroom and do more drugs. So this kind of slowed down the work process. So it all came to an end when Chris said I had enough, and he wanted to do something with his life. And he said, I want to become a motorcycle mechanic. There's a school in Phoenix. I'm leaving. I got to get out of New York. I can't do this anymore. I can't stay hot. I can't stay clean. And so I said, I understand. So it got us back to both Greg Scott and myself. And we tried to work again without Chris. We decided to go for another name. We went under the name, the Institute of Death Studies, IDS. And we were going to go back to our original sound, which was like Brighter Death Now. We really wanted to go back to like a death ambient, death industrial sound. And we had cut like a 35-minute 4-track tape and everything. Okay. It sounded good, but I was in no shape at all to carry on with this. I was pretty much becoming one of the guys you see at a park bench. I was like a park bench guy, hitting drugs, getting more drugs. So it wasn't working out. And I did a geographic with the help of my family to get out to Los Angeles. So this is I think it's 1994 now. And I got out to Los Angeles. I'm piss broke. I kicked 3-day habit on a Greyhound bus. I'm delirious. I had no sleep. And I get out the bus, and I'm in the bus depot in downtown Los Angeles. I look out the window, and I see people outside in downtown Los Angeles smoking crack. Okay? Literally. And I was a crackhead too. So I'm looking, going, oh my God. I'm like, I just left that, and it's right outside. And I'm like very nervous and stuff. And I'm in the depot, and I'm trying to like contact friends. I had a handful of change. And I look up at the TV set. They had like a TV set there, for like people waiting for the bus. And you have to understand, I've been in like a 2-3 year funk. I have no idea what's going on in the world. So I look up at the television set, and I see a white Ford Bronco, and I see about 50 cop cars in the street. Now, I don't know what's happening. It's live. And I'm like, this is what my brain said. Stupid me. I'm like, yeah, man, my friends, they always said there's a lot of police in Los Angeles. You got to watch your step. And I literally thought in my brain that this is what Los Angeles is like. There's hundreds of police officers driving around randomly. I'm like, my God, it's like they got this place on lockdown. And I'm like, oh my God, this is really scary. I got scared. I'm like, there's just because Cop Shoot Cop came out there like 3 years before they played Los Angeles, and they had a van that was color. The van itself, their tour van was camouflaged, and they had fireworks, and they were shooting off fireworks downtown. And the LAPD showed up and took out every single thing in their van, and they had to explain, no, we're not terrorists, no, we're not agitators. We're a rock band. We do this music, and we have fireworks. And they said, well, the fireworks are illegal. You're lucky you're not in jail. That truck looks like a terrorist truck. It's camouflage. We have no idea what you're doing. This is a block away from City Hall. Okay, so that mindset, them coming back telling me these stories about LA, I'm like, so I didn't know what the hell was going on. So that was the O.J. Simpson famous Bronco chase.
Right.
And I didn't know what the hell was going on. I'm like, wow. So like it took me a long time to finally get sober and clean. I got sober and clean. I went through the 12-step program. It's no secret. I worked my program. I got sober. I made amends to people. I paid back people I could and everything. And, you know, it was really, really hard. It was really hard, but it was done. A friend of mine lent me a bicycles and a Thomas Brothers guide, which is the map.
Yep.
It's a big, thick map, and you can just look through it and say, okay. So that's how I got around in Los Angeles. I'm on this little bike with a little basket in front with a Thomas Brothers guide and a little thermos for water. And I'm going to 12-step program meetings all over town, anything to keep me sober.
Yep.
And then I said, I want to go back and do this noise music again. So the first thing I got was a tape recorder. I went to a pawn shop and I bought a $10 tape recorder. And they were like, you know, you can go to, thrift store, Goodwill, Salvation Army, and buy like beat up tapes, Michael Jackson, whatever, the 25 cents, and you take them and you tape over them. And now you got tapes. So I did it all on a budget. I did the whole thing on a budget. And eventually I got a little practice amp and I was making noise. And that's how I led up to here. So I'm going to fast forward a lot. There's a lot of different projects, including Dog with Steve Davis.
Yep.
And I started a few projects and they came and went and then everything. So like now, here we are in 2019. There's a lot of the story I left out. So around 2019, I'm doing a few things. I'm working with a friend of mine in Cary Redemptor, my friend Kirk. He's a professional musician. So I've got this duo going on. And I said, you know, it's COVID-19 lockdown, okay? And what I'm seeing on YouTube and I'm seeing on social media and I'm seeing everywhere is like people are very, very agitated, you know, not only the stress of the pandemic, but like the supply chain. So there's people literally fighting in parking lots and fighting at big box stores. And I was already interested in doing something harsh noise wall. So it just came to me, no duh, Wallmart. So Walmart. So the whole idea is back in the Final Solution days, I was angry about a lot of other things, usually scene politics or some bullshit hypocrisies. But now I'm angry about other things. I'm really angry about corporations and capitalism and inequality. You know, my wife, Darby, wrote an amazing book called Inequality. She co-wrote a book called Inequality, which is on Cambridge Press, one of the most prestigious, academies in the world, okay, in the UK. So this book was very influential with me. Being married to Darby is very influential to me. We can talk about these issues. I love her so much. And the thing is that I learned so much from her. She's a person of learning. She teaches. She's a professor of sociology. Okay, so I'm trying to couch what I'm doing, Walmart, with an idea that it really isn't about me. It's about a larger system of inequality and how capitalism, if it worked well and it was clean capitalism, it could work for all. It's a very, there's a way, but it's structured in a certain way that is a hegemony and it's a hierarchy of power here and then everybody else down here. And there's a lot of Marx theories, Karl Marx theories involved with this and economics and everything. So I'm not going to sit here and try to pretend I'm my wife and talk about it with any sort of like expertise. All I know is that I've always seen the working class get screwed And I always thought that maybe art was a way out of that. But when you get to that, there's even another hierarchy. There's even another hegemony in the art structure itself. So there's no end to it. You really can't escape it. And that, you know, around that time in the 80s, there was a lot of politicizing of art, you know.
Mhm.
So like art became a sort of, I don't want to say weaponized. I think that everyone should really express themselves. So I like art and I like music that has a message. One thing I have, and to detract it from a lot of harsh noise, is that it is what it is. It's harsh noise. Sometimes it has no content and no context. It's just person, table, gear, set, over. Buy a t-shirt, and I said, there's a lot going on in the world, you know. If I can describe what I do besides the genres of harsh noise wall or power electronics, is I like to consider what I do crisis music. The music I'm doing is about a crisis. We are in a crisis, and I don't want to get into it because it's just too big for me to talk about right now. I don't care if you don't believe in climate change. It's really hot out today. It's summer. I get it. But things are happening. Corporations, are they responsible? Some will say no. Many will say yes. Who knows? Big box stores, they have millions of dollars at their resources. Mom and pop shops, as they used to be called, brick and mortar stores, suffer. They don't benefit from Walmart. They can't compete with the volume. They can't compete with the prices. Most of the stuff is imported from third world countries or made in sweatshops. So there's this whole thing of violence and hostility and that goes on in a corporation, in this stuff. I live in the real world. When I leave the house with my wife or I go outside or do something, I'm in its world. All the books and all the cool tapes are fine here. But when you're out there, it's game on and none of that counts. No one cares how cool you are. No one cares about your t-shirt or what you're trying to say. It's really just sort of that. And that's the aggression and that's the rage and all that's the hostility, because you can go to Walmart or Target or just anywhere and someone's going to hand you your ass because you bumped them or they don't like you or they're having a moment, they're having an issue. So they decide to attack you, or there's a lot of hostility out there. There's like, I hate to call it this, but there's a lot of douchebaggery out there. There's just dudes driving around. They've got testosterone. They got a big car, all tatted up, and they're looking for like, they feel that they can just move in on any situation. So you got like this sort of like mentality of that. You've got unstable people. You've got an economy that's crumbling with the tariffs now, all this stuff. But I'm not here to be a spokesperson or a newscaster or anything. All I'm saying is that I can't operate in a world without seeing this. And that's the impetus of the new projects that I'm working on. These are the things, because my art has always been conceptual. My art has always been about something. This is one thing I learned from punk, is that don't blow your chance. Yeah, the Ramones, they're cute and their songs are fun and catchy, but they're not really saying anything. The Clash were saying something. Crass were saying something. And all these other bands that were getting very personal, like, you know, Negative Approach, Circle Jerk. Okay, they're talking about social issues. They're talking about personal issues. That's kind of lacking a lot in what's going on, especially in power electronics, where it's always about male dominance and, you know, sexual deviancies and everything. I went through that whole stage. I think now there's a new movement, and the new movement is people like Stephen Makita Power Electronics, and Sean Beard from Never Sorry, and even Bobby Allman from Cut, where the context of their lyrics are not about those things. They're about other things, more personalized, more internal stuff going on, rather than here's my chance to like bully this or dominate that or forceful this. Because if you want that shit, it's in droves. Just go watch Andrew Tate videos on YouTube if you want that. Jeffrey Epstein operated as a basically sex trafficking fucking network with all these people. Okay. So that completely blows out all this sort of power electronics deviancy. They are the deviants. They are the ones doing that. And I hate to be some more high ground, but I don't think you would want your sister or your mother or your aunt or a friend in a situation of that nature. Andrew Tate
of course not.
Right.
Yeah, of
Jason
course not.
Tate has made millions of dollars and has millions of followers. That dude. And people like Charlie Kirk that's telling you some bullshit story about you have to be this righteous person and be a Christian and a great American. You can be those things, but you don't have to be a douchebag on top of that. My grandfather and my family taught me humility, and I had to be taught humility back in 12-step programs. One of the things they teach you in 12-step programs is you have to have humility. You have to own up to the things that you did, and you have to take full responsibility. You can't shuck it off and say, well, it's because my mother beat me, or the world is in crisis, and like, I understand that. I understand that. So my personal life is I have to be very humble. And on the other end, the world is in a sort of jeopardy right now. I don't feel sometimes right being in certain areas. I don't like being, anything could happen at any time, even in a supermarket. I've seen people fighting at the supermarket. So all this aggression is where I'm at. It's not an idealized fantasy of sex and violence and deviancy. Probably none of these people actually operate in that world. Maybe some do. Maybe some people are in the BDSM community, or they're fucking out there fucking doing some sort of heinous stuff. But I don't really think so. It would have already appeared in the community if that was the case. Okay, yeah, sure, there's a lot of like bickering and, oh, this person was abusive, that person was abusive. Okay, those are like minor squabbles. But one thing I've always said is that the noise community, if anything, has not been infiltrated by corporations or organized crime, because there's not enough money to be generated for it to be corrupted by forces like that. And once they show up, it's all over. Pop music is almost, it's a partnership between power, corporate power. I'd say organized crime is in there somewhere, okay, and entertainment. So I have to ask myself a philosophical question: is what I'm doing entertaining? Am I entertaining people? Is this propaganda? Is this some sort of platform for my ego? I'm an egotist. I'm just telling people where it's at, or what is this? So I have to, and I don't sit in any one camp. All I'm doing is saying I have put out a series of music. Here's another thing I did. I did Defective. I did this with John Grimaldi. This is another project that I did to get away from the sort of like, the lyrics are much different from like your typical power electronics. You talk about, you wanted to talk about film. I was in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, #2. I'm in the opening scene. I was also in GX Jupiter Larson's movie from The Haters. Okay, A Noisy Delivery. I have a small bit part in that. Okay. I'm in Money with Steve Davis. It's kind of hush. There's no credits on this thing. It's every track is called Money, 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 Money. It's because it's supposed to be, has nothing to do with egos or credits or anything like that. I'm just going through this really fast because I think we're running out of time. Unknown
We got a
Hierarchy.
little bit. Go ahead.
Okay. Unknown Hierarchy is it's basically, this would be honestly Helltown Incorporated Phase 2, because it's just me with tapes and keyboards. It's solo, just to a certain extent. So this is another, I kind of go back to the original ideas of just a guy in a room with some gear making sounds, but each one has a certain theme. This one is basically how psychologists and marketers come together, and they create these sort of dynamics with how psychologically you are driven towards certain products. So they make the product enticing, they make the product, and this is all worked out in marketing and psychology because they want you to buy a product. So that's what this one is about. I did something called the Bonus Dark. The Bonus Dark is, here's a sticker. I can send this to you. We have tons of stickers. Bonus Dark. I'm sorry, I'm not a salesman. I'm just telling you what I've done in my life.
No. Talk about all your stuff. That's what this is about.
Right. The Bonus Dark is me, David Reed, and Zach from Necroviolence, and also Grant Richardson, who does a lot of the work. Oh, he's in Nod, and he does a lot of the mastering work for Phage Records. And it's basically, we put out these tapes. They always have a theme. The theme for Bonus Dark is basically, the idea is that how fame is also sometimes a great destroyer of people. whether it's their ego or it's the business itself or something down the line, the pressure of it, the drugs, anything that can divert you. If you're on this like path of going up, or so ex-child stars. The first tape was dedicated to Christian Brando because being the son of Marlon Brando, he always had trouble. Drugs. He shot. I
remember.
He shot his sister's boyfriend in front of her at the house. He died of pneumonia at a young age, so he had a rough life. I did like a whole song cycle, sound cycle about his life with all these interesting parts, elements of his life. This is something I did with John Hammer called Caprachicos. Okay, Caprachicos is a really interesting term. It's not really it's kind of a made up name, and it basically means child buyers. It's almost like a guttural sort of slang for child buyers, and it's not what you think. What it really is that, according to lore, legend. Now, there's people that say it never happened. Some people that there are people that would basically sell their children to these Caprachicos, and the Caprachicos would do terrible things to them, like deform them, like really like take out their teeth or like damage their legs or cut their ears off and put them on the street with a cup so that they can make money off them. It's really and there's stories about it, but I can't really there's no real foundation. There's an amazing movie called The Laughing Man. It's a silent movie where the Caprachicos take a man and they cut him in such a way that he has this infinite smile on his face. And if you look at it, you can see where they got the ideas from the Joker.
Yeah, I was going to say that's where the Joker came from. Yeah,
exactly. So that's what I worked on with Caprachicos, because I really saw that people are doing things to themselves with plastic surgery and Botox and everything. So I sort of, as a sort of modern day Caprachicos, that people are putting themselves out there for the presentation of self and all this. So that's what that's about. Is another Unknown Hierarchy tape, and they're really unsexy sort of topics. Like this one's about patents. Okay, here's a schematic of a patent, because it's really interesting if someone says, there's copyright control and then there's patents. So like the whole idea is that the name of the tape is prior art. And that's a term. It's a legal term, meaning that if I have this and I add this to that, okay, you basically built a foundation. I can patent this.
Yep.
This becomes a whole different item. But this itself is patent. When you do something like this, you have to acknowledge that this was prior art. This was prior before you did this. So there's a lot of legal wrangling on what exactly a patent is. How does it operate in the world? This has to do with copyright issues and whatnot. So these are like issues that are, for me, go back to the original form of industrial, because if we're going to talk about industrial, we're going to talk about production. We're going to talk about actual production and industrial and commerce and everything else. If you want to slap a girl with bondage on it, if you want to put a dead body on the cover, that's going to sell it. But the thing is that I'm kind of like pulling back from that, and I'm talking about other issues, other things that are involved in a larger scope of macro societies.
Right.
And we have always been sort of iced out of that. You won't see anyone going, maybe in this, for instance, but you don't see people on the news representing the noise community about how they think they can take a space and reconvert it and reestablish it as a venue, a community center, a performance space. None of that gets talked about. You hear a lot of people saying, we're going to build this and we're going to build that. And that puts pressure on an entire community that's not ready for the shock of gentrification or revitalization. I know I keep going on, but these things are the things that matter.
No. What I was going to say is we're a very small and tight-knit community. And like I said, the reason why I wanted to do this interview had nothing to do with you. Steve Makita, who he and I have been friends for 20-something years, and I put out releases for him with Lockweld, said, you need to talk to Eddie. You and Eddie would get along like really well. So, but this is how this world works is, I talk to him, he gives me feedback to you. And then all of a sudden, because I did an interview with Makita, DeWitt from Integrity messages me and he's like, that was a really great interview. We start talking. Guess what? Now I'm going to do an interview with DeWitt about all that stuff as well too. And it would have never have happened if Makita didn't tell me about you and DeWitt didn't see the interview. So like I said, no, like we have to keep it small and personalized. Like the second it gets too big, we're all going to lose the special quality that we each have. So
yes. And I total props to Stephen Makita for connecting us together. And I really love Stephen. I loved Lockweld, the Industrial Requiem that came out on Dragonflight was big influence. That's another thing. I won't talk much, but like I think a lot of people misunderstand Makita because they don't know his life. They don't know why he has, as they say, he talks a lot about his faith, and his faith is very, very personal to him. And I totally respect that because what happens is he is allowing us in. He is allowing us into his life, into his art, into his heart. And it means something to him, so vital that his message, though it seems angry, is really about love. That's all we talk about. When we talk on the phone, I know he's talking about love. He loves me. He loves you. He loves people. But he also has this thing that these people are jerks, or why are they even doing this? So he's got this sort of conflict, and the conflict comes out in the art. And I really believe that is strong. It's mighty. And like I said, there's no real movement, but like Sean Beard and Bobby Allman, Stephen, and I'm trying to do my best here, is to move away from this aggro, macho, masculine, patriarchy of anger and move into more of an understanding of this is coming from the soul. This is coming from my heart. This is how I feel about certain things. It's not a movement because we're not doing it together. I think we're doing it because we're expanding. The art has to move on. It can't just sit in this pool of what it's been for 40 years now. It has to move on. And I welcome it. It's refreshing change. Joe from Furtaxen, if I read his lyrics from Furtaxen, he's in New Jersey. They're not all of the lyrics, but most of the lyrics are extremely personal, and they're coming from a different place. Okay. They're not about the things that you typically hear out of the mouths of power electronic artists. They're coming from a different place. Right. So I encourage that. I encourage a new way of looking at how to do your art, my influences, like I say, my biggest influence in my life is my wife. My wife is my biggest influence. She is the most beautiful person in my life. She's the closest person to my life. She's the one that I care for. She's the one that cares for me. That family, if you can create a community like that, good or bad, whatever, you have something. But it really starts from that. It starts from a core of you and the ones that you love and then outward. Unfortunately, a lot of times people come out of really bad situations. They don't have that. It's really, really hard to become socialized when you really don't have a foundation like that. And my heart goes out to people that come to the noise scene to find an outlet, to find a family, to find a community. I'm welcoming to that. There's a lot of things going on in the noise community right now. There was a really big situation that happened last week that really shook up the entire community. And I don't want to get into it, but there were certain people out there that I can't do anything with. I can't operate with. I don't like the way they operate. I don't like the way they operate. It's not very, to me, a way that I would do any sort of business or work or operating or collaborating with at all. And I've gotten very angry about these things, and sometimes not for my benefit. Sometimes I'm very outspoken, especially on social media, maybe not to my benefit, that I should just maybe keep my mouth shut. But sometimes I wouldn't say injustice, but just bullshit. And I have to call it. I have to, because otherwise it continues,
No. I think we're going to freeze it here on this interview. And like I said, I do want to say, like, it's been amazing to talk to you. And like,
Well,
I think we're building, I think you and I have been starting to build a friendship, and I think we're
we are.
moving into, we're moving into a pretty good friendship now.
Yes.
But like I said, we'll do another one of these for sure, I think, because we can talk about your new stuff and things that are going on. But what what I really love you to do is kind of talk to everybody and kind of tell us, like, what's the next 3 to 6 months look like for you? Like, what's up? What's going on? Is there anything that we should be looking forward to?
Okay. Well, I started another project. You see, one of the things I have a bad habit is that every day I just start another project. So I've got this new project called Dystopian Book Club, and it's drastically different from the harsh noise and the power electronics that I've done. It's much more quieter electronic. I would say kind of dark ambient, but more abstract. I do it with my friend Sander and Mark Soden, who is a staple here in Southern California. He does the Santa Ana Noise Fest. He plays a great trumpet. He's always involved with people. Sanders, wonderful. He's involved with the community in Long Beach and everything. And I just decided to pitch this idea to Sander, and it's very exciting. We had our first show last Wednesday. It went very well. Ooh. And once again, it has a theme. The theme is that I feel a lot of the science fiction writers of the 40s, 50s, and 60s and 70s, that whole period, saw a lot of what was happening right now with artificial intelligence, with cryptocurrency, with Flock. I don't know if you know these security cameras now. They can read your license plate, and they do this, data extraction, and they do all of this Orwellian 1984 stuff. And I was reading this stuff when I was a kid. So I'm saying, right. Keep science fiction fiction. It's real now. It's here. And it's scary. And so, like, the Dystopian Book Club is really, an ode to all of these writers that were kind of warning us through their books about what's happening. And, science fiction has always been this sort of fringe, sort of like, genre. It was never taken seriously. And now people are reading back in these books and saying, my God, they were talking about this in the 50s and 60s and 70s. You want to talk about J.G. Ballard or Philip K. Dick or even William Gibson, hundreds of them, right? And they were talking about this stuff, and they were like, maybe it was just like, hey, wake up. This is a wake-up call. If this continues or this happens, you're in big trouble. We're all in big trouble because we're all in this together. As individual as you want to be, you got to go out your front door. And if the things out there are controlled by machines or by giant empires of commerce and power that can snap policies and throw them away and say, law and order is our way, that's super dangerous. It sounds like a bad science fiction movie. Well, guess what? We're living in a bad science fiction movie. They Live is supposed to be a movie. It's not supposed to be real. You saw They Live, an Idiocracy. And I'm looking at this and I'm making parallels. I'm like saying, so that's why I started this Dystopian Book Club. I'm going to focus on that. There'll be more. Nice. There'll be more Wallmart in the future because it's kind of my mainstay. I'm still contributing to Money with Steve Davis. I've got some unreleased Unknown Hierarchy that's coming out. We might do some more defective stuff going on. What else is happening? What other tapes? Yeah, there's other projects that I've dropped off. I was in a project, I guess everyone should know now, I was in a project called Psycho Ex-Girlfriend. We recently played in August. I can say that we bombed. We played with the one of the headliners, although they played before us, was Consumer Electronics. So I met Philip Best for the first time, and that was interesting. But as far as what we did on stage, it bombed. And this has always been one of the frail projects. It's really controversial because we use actual voicemails without any agreement with the people here. So we use real voicemails on here. One side of the tape are the voicemails as they are, and the other side has noise and mixtures of that. So, but it's kind of controversial because, I found out that one of the tapes, the second tape, has someone on it, the voicemails, who's actually someone within the power electronic scene. And it's basically a meltdown on a voicemail of a relationship that was going really bad. And, but I stepped away from that. I felt that maybe that's exploiting someone's vulnerability.
Understandable.
It's very, very personal. And I said to myself, you know what? If I got to walk the walk, I got to talk the talk and talk the talk and walk the walk. I can't be in a project like this and say to myself that, at first I thought it was very interesting to get to the source of things, the actual, voicemail sources of people having meltdowns. Psycho ex-girlfriend comes from, unfortunately, once again, maybe it's my, douchebaggery coming out for the last time, is that, that both of the people on here are women that are having really bad relationship issues, and they're basically pleading and they're fighting and they're just talking into a voicemail. So that's what this is. It's a cringe moment, really. But then I said to myself, and then I didn't really get along with the partner too much, very well, the person I was doing this with, which I'll leave out of this right now. And I just said, no, I don't know. I don't think this is really going where I want it to go. So there was supposed to be a third tape, and we couldn't negotiate about it because he didn't think the material was as strong as these two. And I said, yeah, it's not, but maybe we can put it out as a third. And that was part of the sort of splitting out. And then I went down there and I thought that we had it because we practiced the night before. And then we went on stage and the whole thing completely just kind of fell apart. The first few minutes were great, but then it kind of fell apart. And he was on the mixer on stage, and let's just leave it at that. But I really had a really great time. Victor from Circle 23 got me out there. I really want to give props to Victor. He took care of me from beginning to end. I met his family. He was a great dude. I would work with that guy in a heartbeat again. So props to Victor 23. I always try to thank people who helped me, like you, and Steven and Victor, and, people that are in my life that are really operating with me, I'll give you this one quick one. I know it's kind of like I put you on the spot, but I have a really good friend that I work with on projects. I'm actually working on one called SCAB, which stands for Spectrum. No, sorry, SEAS. SCAB is another one. SEAS is Spectrum Emergency Alert Systems. And I work with a guy named John McVeigh, who's a really great artist, and he's in Las Vegas. And I'm hoping that I can pitch you that you interview John McVeigh, because he's a fascinating guy. He has
probably will happen if you want me to.
Yeah,
I'm just saying, that's the way.
He's in your hood. I know you're in Las Vegas, and you should really connect with him. So I'm sorry, I've got a list of things. So SEAS is basically the whole thing with Nancy Guthrie. I don't know if you noticed, but she was kidnapped. Okay. Yeah. Right. And this was in Arizona, where he used to live. So I started to see how tabloid TV, they turned this whole case. First of all, the case was flubbed by the way the sheriff was handling it and everybody. And like, there's this, like masked figure that looks like a power electronics artist that comes to the front door. Yep. So John and I decided to do another project that was based on news, vital news project. So this the first tape that's coming out on Lust Tapes. Great friend Egbert in Europe, Lust Tapes, check them out. They're out there. He's going to put out our first, I think, CD. And the second one is going to be based on this mysterious thing that's happening. There's at least a dozen physicists and scientists that have disappeared. They don't know where they are. It sounds like a conspiracy. They didn't be taken away by UFOs. They just are, they've been disappeared. We don't know where they went. And there's a lot of mystery to this. So we're looking into this. So we're kind of using this sort of like, X-Files sort of like approach. Sure. Yeah, we're not doing investigative reporting. We're just looking at this, and we're making sounds and using sound bites from the actual official reports to say something is very wrong here. Now they're trying to get Nancy. The update is Nancy Guthrie's body has not been recovered. The kidnappers did not send it back to the family. So that's what they're working on. So as you can see, they're kind of dark, morbid sort of mysteries that are going on. And that's what SEAS is all about. And I'm also doing one called SCAB, and SCAB is short for Shortchanged at Birth. And I'm doing that with Carlo from Last Action and Noah from Autophagia. Okay. He also works with John Hammer with Comprachico. So that one is based on how childhood trauma and basically environmental damage causes basically people, when they adult, to basically have damage before they actually have time to actually become socialized. So we're talking about plastic in the water, PFAS, environmental degradation, pollution, drug use by the family. So
Yep.
you're basically shortchanged at birth. You're born into a situation you didn't want to have to happen. And there's thousands of children out there that are born into bad situations.
Yeah.
And you have to look at that. There's nothing I can do about it. There's not, the best thing I can do is just allow people to understand that not everyone comes from the same place you do. That's all.
Right. No. Thank you, man. I appreciate this time so much. We will talk again for sure. We'll get another session together and we'll chat. Because, yeah.
Thank you.
But outside of that, man, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you today. And like I said, from the doorway to hanging out with Eddie from 5,001 different projects, but they're all interesting and cool. So I'm glad we got to talk about them. So.
Well, long live Dragonflight. I was a very, very big fan. As I showed you, I have still some of my Dragonflight here.
I know.
Thank you. You got to bring this back a little bit. I mean, this was happening.
You know what? I have another project that I'm doing right now that is kind of the post version of As All Die, so you may enjoy it. So,
well, share it with me, and
I will. I'll send it over to you. It's called Abyssic Slumber, and it's kind of like the next generation of As All Die. Unfortunately, I can never bring back As All Die because the guy I work with, Keith, he lives in Rhode Island. I live in Vegas. We've grown old and we've decided not to do that project anymore. So
okay. Well, it's remembered. It's historical.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you didn't die in obscurity. You're here. It's great.
Hey, I'm glad we get to talk about this. But yeah, well, until next time, my friend, thank you so very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for this time. Thank you.